Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. You are listening to Incorruptible Massachusetts, and our mission here is to help you understand state politics. We cover why it's so broken. We talk about what we could have here in Massachusetts if we fixed it and how you can get involved. And today we are talking to Jonathan Paz, and he is the organizing director of No on Prop 22, which is a ballot question about Uber and Lyft drivers. So first, let me go ahead and have everybody introduce themselves. We have our regular co-hosts, and I will always say best for last. We're going to have our guest come in after us. Jordan Berg Powers, you want to introduce yourself?
My name's Jordan Berg Powers. I use he, him. I have several years experience in progressive political organizing in Massachusetts, and I have worked on a ton of ballot initiatives.
Jonathan Cohn.
Jonathan Cohn, he, him, his, based here in Boston. Also have been active with issue and electoral campaigns here. Probably not as many ballot initiatives as Jordan.
Anna Callahan, she, her, coming at you from Medford. Not been involved in ballot initiatives at all, but a lot of other sort of electoral organizing. And I'm so excited to have Jonathan Paz here. Jonathan, if you just want to introduce yourself and the organization you're with and the mission of that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Jonathan Paz, him, L pronouns. I'm the organizing director for the Coalition to Protect Workers' Rights. We're essentially a coalition of civil rights labor groups trying to defend the enshrined battles that we've won over a long period of time here in Massachusetts to essentially push back on a very cynical bill by big tech, trying to basically take away labor and civil rights as we know them in Massachusetts.
Whew. Well, we would love to hear about the ballot question itself. Like, what does it do? What is the background? How did it come about? And how is it going to affect Uber and Lyft drivers?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2020, after the state of California passed a new law to protect app-based workers from exploitation, big tech went on the attack. These multi-billion-dollar companies inundated California voters with $200 million in false and misleading advertisements to deny their workers equal rights. We're talking about Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, and other big tech companies pouring in millions upon millions of dollars. I believe, on average, you can, Uber spent $58 million, DoorDash 51, Lyft 48, but who's counting? While people quarantined in defense of COVID-19, big tech bought themselves a law. Now app-based workers in California make less money and have fewer rights than before. On August 2021, a California court struck down the big tech ballot measure that we call Prop 22 as unconstitutional. But that hasn't stopped those companies. After spending $220 million to buy a law in California, they're taking their campaign of lies and distortions to Massachusetts. If they win here, the rules for workers and consumers are treated. How workers and consumers are treated will forever change. The protections that we as workers hold dear and rely on will be lost for generations to come. So a little bit about what we know of what's happening here in Massachusetts. We know that they plan on spending around $110 million here. We've already seen a canvassing operation unlike any that we have seen for them to collect 120,000 signatures on the ballot. I mean, these are historic amount of money that are being poured into the Commonwealth. Almost 300,000. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that the only thing that they didn't do, though, is pay their workers well. I was at some of the locations where they were collecting initiatives and asked their workers what they were paid, and all of them said minimum wage. And then I had long talks with them about why they should not get people to sign the ballot initiative for it, especially since they're making minimum wage. Sorry, go ahead. So they spend a lot of money, and I'm going to guess that they spend it on firms who are top heavy and don't pay their workers well. Sounds familiar. Sounds like a familiar model.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they are basically hiring some of the best talent here in Massachusetts at the highest levels, but they're also targeting very key demographics, and they're doing that on purpose. They do it through very persuasive marketing and advertisements, but I'll jump to that later. I want to talk a little bit about what the ballot measure would do here in Massachusetts. Essentially, the companies would pay workers less than minimum wage, make no contributions to Social Security or unemployment. They would not pay workers for injuries on the job. So if you're taking an Uber down the street and you guys get into an accident, guess who you end up suing? It's not Uber and Lyft. You know what I mean? It's that person who's desperately trying to make ends meet.
Yeah.
That's awful.
And this is the part that I take a little bit of offense to, and why at least it hits home to me. It would exempt them from laws against discrimination and sexual harassment. And these are the cases that come up time and time again. You have a lot of drivers who are deactivated for no reason, who happen to be predominantly Black and brown. We know that they're being sued because particularly Black drivers are rated more harshly than your white drivers. And some of their bonus systems reflect that. In other words, white drivers will get better pay and bonuses because they know these are quote unquote higher rated drivers. So, there are all these civil rights protections that we talk about and glorify in the 1960s would essentially become exempt. But for drivers and delivery workers, it also means that they will not get fairly reimbursed for gas and other expenses. Big tech companies would have the right to kick off workers off the app at any time. And these tech companies would be shielded from liability, right? So that would be codified into law because they want to continue misclassifying these drivers as independent contractors and not as employees.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like at the crux of all this, right? If you act and work and sound like a worker, you should be classified as such. That's what we call the ABC labor test, the labor law that we have. That's kind of like at the top of the helm in terms of protecting people, right? And they want to just use the whole independent contractor. They're not our employees, and therefore whatever happens to them happens to them, and they want to be absolved of those responsibilities. So this is go ahead, John.
So the ABC test, which is like a core part of Massachusetts labor law, what is involved in that for determining whether or not somebody should count as an employee for reasons of labor law?
Yeah, so independent contractors are typically a category of people who can work for a company but not receive paid time off, sick time off the job, and basically a minimum wage as we understand it. So we have 3 prongs. Essentially, prong number 1 requires them to be free from control and direction in connection with the performance of the service. That's kind of the main argument that they use because these drivers are technically free. But we know that they're highly regulated and highly controlled. And we know that in California, when they passed this, they basically were telling people when to work. The second one requires them to perform outside the course of the employer's business. If you're an Uber and Lyft company, you're driving people across. How is driving not the main component of your job?
Right.
I don't understand.
And where could they possibly live? They're going to be driving inside the Uber corporate offices. I mean, it's like literally impossible,
It's one of the kind of core kind of false misrepresentation thing. That's what I was trying to think of. That Uber and Lyft have been promoting about that they're the app rather than the service, because by claiming to be simply an app, like to present themselves as just the middleman to connect Group A of quote unquote independent contractor with Group B, a person looking for a ride. Whereas if there would be no ride that could exist, like that, nobody thinks of Uber and no person who uses Uber and Lyft thinks of the car that they go on a ride in as somehow a subsidiary part of Uber and Lyft. That there would be no Uber and Lyft if there were no cars for people to ride in or drivers to drive those cars.
But in order for them to be like working in inside the company, they really should be like Tron, like inside the app. Right? That's how they're going to define it. Yeah. So Jonathan, this is really It sounds terrible. Not happy about it. And you've talked a little bit already. I love your description of sort of the crazy many tens of millions of dollars that these companies are putting in. Can you just contrast that with like who is in the coalition, like who is paying for this, and then who's in the coalition fighting against this ballot question?
Yeah, so I'll start with what I consider the good guys, our side of this campaign. We're basically a coalition of community-based labor, civil rights, environmental justice, and faith-based organizations. We want to protect the right of all workers. We also want to protect consumers because at some point we're all using Uber and Lyft. Our transportation system in Massachusetts is criminal. That's a side point, but we all have to depend on it, right? And we don't have the same amount of money that they're talking about. I mean, we'll be lucky if we raise $5 to $10 million, right? The other side is waging a campaign that's going to be funded over $100 million. And a key component is that a lot of dark money is going to be injected into this, and it's going to be hard to follow because they only have to be required to have a year-end report in January. And that's for us to find out about the canvassers who are gathering signatures. And do you know the next time they'll have to report again? In September 2022, right? So when this thing's almost over, essentially, you know, it's going to be a tough thing. We know very little about, we know some things about what happened in California. California is like the big lesson to learn from. But what I recently found out was that over half of the money that they acquired in California was from foreign money. Right? It's not even American donors and contributions. It's actually coming from out of the country. And yeah, I mean, we're talking, they created this coalition for independent work. And essentially they just have all of these big tech companies, a few community groups that I'm aware of. One of them that's being investigated for fraud, but that's a different point. But we just basically understand that they're doing a lot of this turfing type of mobilization where, you know, they can trick their drivers into saying this is a great idea for you because they control the app. If you're inundated with these little notifications on your app, of course they can pull better. You know, they're going to pull better and they're going to say, do you want to keep your flexibility? Right. And that's, I think, the big distortion. And I think the really dangerous part of this conversation, right? They're saying to their drivers, to their workforce, to keep your flexibility, you will have to give up basic labor and civil protections just to keep your flexibility, right? And that's not a fair bargain. That's a dangerous bargain.
But they're also not being open about it. They're just talking about the flexibility, right? They're not saying you're going to give up X, Y, and Z. They're saying, oh, you won't be able to be so flexible anymore. Silent about what they're giving up.
Also, that's also just not true. To be clear, that you don't have to give up. It's also it's a false promise. They already have control. If they want to kick you off, they can do that. If they want to limit your hours, they can do that. If they want to limit your access, they can do that. If you keep the protections that are already there, it will continue to go as it's going. So if you have flexibility now, you still have flexibility.
It's also kind of a core thing of when you have the flexibility of the boss versus the flexibility of the employee are fundamentally, like, without any type of strong bulwark for the rights of that employee, flexibility really just means flexibility of the boss.
Yeah.
Because you're not on a level, like, flexibility is never an equal playing field.
Somehow we have these laws in the books and they're able to allow the flexibility that they currently say that they're going to lose.
That is hilarious. If you don't pass this new thing, then you'll lose something. What?
As well as one thing I think is a core point as well, Jonathan, when you're talking about the money that they spent, is I wouldn't be shocked if going into next year, people using Uber or Lyft or DoorDash start being bombarded with ads on the apps themselves as like the users of the apps, of trying to also mobilize not only like the kind of smaller base of people who are employed to try to convince fearmonger, as often happens in labor situations at the workplace, but to kind of try to convey to people using them, oh, you will suddenly lose this if the existing laws in place, which is a fundamental, which is like a blatant lie when you realize that kind of that all that No is saying is we want existing labor laws to stay in place and be better enforced. But that's something that likely seems on the horizon.
Well, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about the racial and social justice components and the LGBTQ justice components. Give us a little bit of a sense of like how this is going to affect the lives of those communities.
Absolutely. There's around 250 to 300,000 app-based workers in Massachusetts.
Wow.
70% of them are Black and brown folk, right? So there's a real determination here from these big tech companies to create a permanent underclass of workers who are not essentially employees, but they have little to no rights on the job. And, these are, socioeconomically disadvantaged communities are in need of higher wages. We're in need of opportunities to develop wealth. And here they're proposing the opportunity for them to create a new minimum wage. The UC Berkeley Labor Center calculated that the new minimum wage in Massachusetts, as we know it, would become $4.82 for part-time drivers and $5.64 for full-time drivers. Is that progress? You know what I mean? It's disgraceful, and I think it's pretty racist how they use like Black and brown people to market this, saying this is good for you. Yet they're just disactivating us, disenfranchising us through the app more and more. And there's a real fear in the drivers to speak up. I mean, part of what I do is recruit drivers. We develop them, we train them. We work with the BIDG, the Boston Independent Drivers Guild. There's a few other groups, but they really struggle sometimes getting folks to speak up for themselves because they're afraid of being deactivated. There's like real surveillance technology in these apps. Like you have to sometimes log in showing your face. So there's that component of fear where people are essentially dissuaded from speaking up for themselves, which is not new, right? It's not new in these labor fights, but it's pretty racist in category if you think about it. I'm also happy to speak to another component which just recently surfaced, but a lot of trans identifying folk are being deactivated or blocked from the app as drivers. And again, these things only come up when people have the courage to actually speak up and talk about it. And I guess enough trans folk have decided to speak up about it, but we're now realizing that's also an impacted community, right? Because they should probably have the same rights and abilities to use the app, whether it's as a consumer or a driver. So there's a lot of elements to this. If I could just add, and I don't mean to go on a tangent here, but something that we find to be pretty illuminating is if this passes, right, what's going to be the ripple effect? Because this is not just about the app-based workers. In California, when they passed it, they saw a major storm of like layoffs from hotel workers, grocery workers, and I'm blanking on the other one. I think it was food packers, like people who are packing food, because they just replaced all of them with gig workers. Why should I deal with this union? Why should I deal with these transit or delivery workers or these clerical workers for city halls when we can just, subcontract these gig workers for less than minimum wage, less worker protections, and we don't have to put them on the books like that. So there's a real domino effect here. I think the labor movement in Massachusetts is pretty united. And that's saying a lot because we're not always united. But I think we all see that this is an existential crisis. I think the eyes of all of the labor world are going to be in Massachusetts next year, because the CEO of Uber has already said, these are not my words, but he said, if this works in Massachusetts, we will take this to New Jersey, we'll take this to Pennsylvania, we'll take this to all these other East Coast states that allow these type of ballot initiatives, right? So this is
something that we've talked about on this show, is the idea that, the corporations and the billionaire donor class and, these right-wing groups, they have a strategy, and their strategy is go from one state to another. Often they start in Republican states. This one was California to Massachusetts, but they pick the states where they think they can pass this stuff. And then they use that to get it passed in other states. And the idea that we need to be leading in that way too. We need to be passing really visionary policy here in Massachusetts where we know it's supported, and then using that to pass those same policies that we want and that we believe in other states. But this is an example of them doing it on the other side.
I also just want to emphasize the one point about what clear kind of ripple effects on labor law it has if you take that much of a hatchet toward kind of laws around independent contractors, right? Because as any of us, if you kind of spend any bit of time, can see how the drivers and the cars are an essential part of the work that Uber and Lyft are doing, right? Or in any other types of things. You could imagine to like what the thing that happened in California, a hotel saying actually cleaning the rooms is as a subsidiary part of our work as a hotel. We are just renting rooms out. They are not our workers anymore. Or like secretarial staff that you would say, well, that's an ancillary part of our work. We are not a business of a secretary, so they're just independent contractors. Or even, let's say, used as like an attack on teachers, if you want to make like that equally bogus claim that actually, no, it's just a school building that we need to, that's the purpose of the school. It's ancillary, or other parts of school staff. And if you want to target cafeteria staff that way, that you have a very clear ripple effect into other industries beyond just the one focusing it. And we'll probably see that in the not frequently disclosed funding as well, where it wouldn't be shocked to see some of the kind of big kind of companies in other industries who want to be able to take advantage of that same gutting of labor law, wanting to see it done there.
Very dangerous.
It's dystopian.
Yeah. I think it's, I mean, I think Jonathan and I are just, we sort of, we saw that big picture as well. Like, it will affect you. Like, if you think this is not going to, like, oh, it's just this app I use and I just want it to be what it is, and so I want to give them what they want, it's going to come for you. This is going to come for you. If you think like, oh, I'm going to be okay. But my guess is that you're probably underpaid currently. You're probably working too much already. There's probably not the sort of protections that you deserve and the pay that you deserve, no matter where you're working. If you're working at the State House, for sure, that's true. If you're working in any of these places. And so it's already bad. This will make it worse because there are at least currently some ways in which your employer is responsible for you, with taxes, with liabilities, with making sure unemployment insurance. And if they can do this, if they can do something so disingenuous as to pretend that these workers are not their workers, then they can do this for literally any one of us, and they will. And they will.
Yeah.
See what happened with privatization. See what happened with all of the other pieces of our that once upon a time felt far-fetched and people were just like, oh, that's just, that's not going to happen, and are now our life that we live, that we complain about. See everything, right? Like the fact that housing has gotten out of control, the fact that transportation has fallen down, the fact that we can't afford to go to higher ed, right? Like these things, which were alarmist, which people would say are just alarmist and won't happen, have all happened to our generations of people, and they're going to happen to you. So this is a really important fight to plug into for all the reasons that the Jonathans have stated.
And I will just, at this point, I will mention, if it's all right, if this is the right place for people to go, that noprop22ma.com, is that the right place for people to sign up, get involved, and we can put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, please. noprop22ma.com if folks want to endorse our coalition, or they want to sign up to volunteer or donate. We'll take some donations, we got to build people power out here. So all of that's welcome. And yeah, we welcome you to visit, check out our website, or follow us. We're at noprop22ma on everything.
Great. And I don't think that we're done yet. Like I only jumped in.
I just want to throw that out there.
No, I wanted to make sure we threw it out there right now. I was like, boy, people are going to be ready to go and ready to jump in right now by listening to this. So, Jordan, I know you love talking about taxes and tax avoidance and how the rich
Yeah.
should pay their taxes and corporations should pay their taxes. So,
Well, I just want Jonathan to talk a little bit more about that piece as well. So there's a part about this that's important regarding sort of just like the future of work and what does it mean for us to have literally no protection. But the other piece is that this is also a large tax avoidance scheme in the guise of flexibility and ballot initiatives.
Yeah, I'll answer that in reverse order if that's okay. But yeah, no, these companies want to shirk their responsibility when it comes to paying into the Commonwealth's unemployment insurance and workers' compensation funds. In fact, U.S. taxpayers stepped in to provide unemployment assistance to thousands of Uber, Lyft, Instacart, DoorDash drivers during the pandemic, while these multi-billion-dollar companies contributed zip. So it's a real detriment, and we always end up paying the bill. Taxpayers end up paying the bill. But I want to make this point clear because this is about the future of work. This is like how we define work in the 21st century. This is the important question of our time. Will the future of work consist of better protections and wages for workers, or will it consist of zero to no protections on the job and less pay, right? Should big tech regulate our civil society, or should civil society regulate big tech? I tend to philosophically think that civil society should make sure that we have integrity and dignity on the job, not the other way around, right? And that's really what we have to answer here. And Massachusetts, as a vanguard of progressive, forward-thinking ideas, should say no to this very cynical thing that is being proposed and will be propagandized all across. We've won and fought big battles like this. I think this may be the biggest one yet. So it's that important that people know that we need to win this thing.
absolutely. I want to super quick, just two final things. I would love to just cover a little bit about what our laws in Massachusetts are like, and that the real problem seems to be that we're just not enforcing the law. I know, Jordan, you were kind of excited to talk about this one.
Yeah, well, I think it's, some of the complaints that some of the drivers have are real. There are problems with how they're being treated, and that actually they're protected by the law, and currently the law's not being enforced. And who's responsible for enforcing it? Well, it's a small department that sits underneath the executive branch, so Governor Baker. So again, Governor Baker, whose money comes from these people, whose backing always comes from corporate people, he will always pick corporations over people. And so he has basically not provided any oversight of this industry, despite having the legal and requirement to do so, despite supposedly doing so. So a lot of the complaints are real, but they are real because Governor Baker isn't doing his job. And this is, I think, important because this is classically what Republicans do, which is they break government and then they go, I don't know who broke this, but give us all your money. Like they literally break it and then ask us to give over all our rights, all our money.
Look how badly this is working when we're in charge.
It's basically, if anyone knows that meme from I Think You Should Leave, with the guy who was driving the hot dog mobile and crashing it into the place. He's like, we are all trying to find the person who did this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, like he's just, like they break things and then they demand that we hand over the keys to their things. They've done this with public education. They've done this with the post office, right? Like they break public institutions. And then they're like, well, I mean, the only people who can fix this are private corporations. We're like, or you could just run it the way it's supposed to be legally run, right? Like it's just, so I think that's an important part of this, that there are complaints and they're not wrong, but there are actual laws that's supposed to be protecting people to do these things. And the AG had a report about they're supposed to be oversight who is driving, and basically they did enough to be able to say that they're like, oh, we did like 10, so we're good, but they missed a ton of people who they're supposed to be overseeing.
And sorry, you want to go ahead?
Sorry, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this because I guess this timeline is very important. Part of the reason why they're proposing this is because the Attorney General, in her great wisdom, is suing them. But that lawsuit can and maybe will be resolved in next year. But, there's always an appeals process. But no matter what, if they pass this ballot initiative, it'll, supersede whatever the outcome of that court case is, because we will have new law. So it's just that important. I mean, even if we propose an alternative to this ballot measure sets precedent, right? So it's that important that we say no. I would love to talk about all the alternatives that we have to this, which worldwide, not just in this country, but worldwide, people are dealing with these contradictions, right? To how we know and understand work. I like the French solution. I mean, if we're just, gossiping here, but
Please,
tell
us what happens in other countries,
Yeah. I mean, some European countries have already said, like, created regulations so they're classified as employees, because that's really the crux of their lie, is misclassifying people. In France, they didn't even go to the table. They just created their own state regulated, like Uber and Lyft, So like no one really takes an Uber in France. It's just this already regulated thing that's app-based.
Wow.
So that's an alternative. We just have a very deregulated market right now for what we call TNCs, transportation network companies. And it's just not, like, they need to follow the law, but it's just not an interesting solution to just say, oh, let's just better exploit these people because we can. It's not a good alternative.
I think yeah, I mean, I just think it's important to remember that there were taxis which were highly regulated, and so much so that when Black and brown people tried to start using liveries, the full force of the government came down on livery drivers, telling them when they could do it, how they could do it. There's a thing called a penny lift, which is just like a shorthand way of saying like short trips that Black and brown people would give each other and ask for money, which is essentially what Uber and Lyft say that they do. And that the police would literally harass Black people who were doing these rides. The minute white people come in and say, oh, look, we have an app, that's all we do, there's just like all rules. They're just like rules disappeared for these white folks with money, right? Like Black and brown communities have been doing this service for years, and the government could not wait to criminalize us, put us in jail, put regulations, put fines on us, right? These are real, like, I can't tell you, people got arrested for for driving pennies. People in Worcester, in Springfield, in Boston, Black and brown communities were at the hands of the police for doing these rides. Uber and Lyft come in, and these white folks get to do whatever they want, and no regulations happen. And what limited regulations we have tried to put on them, they're like, we can't do this. we don't know what to do with this. Imagine if the police started arresting them the way they were arresting Black and brown communities when we were having livery drivers and penny lifts. And so, like, this is the atmosphere. I think it's really important to note how criminally horrible these people are, these corporations are, and how much it's important that we stand up and say enough is enough on these things. Because they literally could not wait to criminalize us when it was Black and brown people doing this exact same thing.
Wow. Well, Jonathan Paz, so fantastic to have you on. Really incredibly important work. I know that you and your team are going to be worth 10 times your weight in gold. They're going to have hundreds of millions of dollars, but we're going to have you and all the donations people will pour in. So we'll try and get the word out about this as much as possible. Thank you so much. Great to have you on. And we will see everybody in a week or two. Happy holidays to everyone.